Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, but there's no actual coffee. Each episode, we interviewed an expert in the field of law enforcement analysis to share their career-defining stories and to get their insights on the world. Please join us on recognizing and learning from these brilliant minds as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder. Today, our guest has 38 years of experience in law enforcement with 100 accommodations. 16 of those years was spent managing the crime analysis unit. He has written numerous white papers and other publications. He spends his time now dropping knowledge to college students and gaining knowledge by traveling the world. And did I mention he's one of the founders of the International Association of Crime Analysts? Please welcome our guest, Mark Stallo. Mark, how we doing?
Doing great, thank you.
How is home life under the COVID quarantine?
Well, I'm pretty fortunate. I have a very big TV and I have a very nice yard, and so I'm able to entertain myself. And plus, in Texas, we're able to get out now, and we're able to go to restaurants and do other things. And hey, I even went to Oklahoma to get a haircut, so that was pretty impressive.
So have you been to a restaurant since it's reopened?
I have been to two.
Okay, so just for those that maybe haven't been out yet, just kind of describe the experience of sitting down at a restaurant these days.
Well, the first restaurant was a couple weeks ago, and the city I live in decided to kind of start getting ahead before the governor actually gave them approval. So we had a little controversy. We made national news. The city was Colleyville. They opened up restaurants where you could eat outside. So we went to, the first night, and we showed up at 4 o'clock because we knew there was long lines. We put in our reservation. They told us to come back at 6. And about 6:30, we actually got to sit on the patio and have dinner. So that was about 3 weeks ago. And then last night, we actually drove across town to meet some friends from out of town, and it was really easy. He went in, and there were tables in all 4 corners and one in the middle, and that was basically, it wasn't even full. So it just changed after a couple of weeks. Not as many people out as there was the first night I went.
Now, do they have tables sectioned off where you can't sit, so they have to be so many spaces? And is there like a one-way alley for servers and people to walk?
No, and last night, the first night, look, they actually had face masks, shields, PPEs. They had everything. Last night, the young lady that waited on us didn't even have a face mask on. Okay, she just came over and asked us what we wanted, and we talked to her, and we were 5 of us at dinner. So it was completely different, and it was in a different county than Dallas. It was in Rockwall County, which is, typically if you're in Dallas, they're requiring us to wear a mask if we go anywhere in a business. Yeah. But outside of Dallas County, you can do whatever you want. No one's requiring any kind of special equipment. Well, in fact, the governor actually overruled Dallas County and told them they couldn't require that. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. We have so many people that try to set the rules.
Oh, boy. All right. Well, I want to get started. I usually ask the question how you earned your analyst badge, the story that you like to tell people, either a particular case that you worked on that was successful, or maybe it's even how you got started in crime analysis. So, what's your badge story?
Okay, so think back. I started in late 1988 in the analyst world. Today, people compete for these jobs. Well, back then, they only had sworn people that they were interviewing for these positions. And I happened to be working midnight to 8 o'clock. I've been doing that for 3-4 years as a supervisor in one of our busiest stations. And I had 2 young ones, a 1 and a 2-year-old. And my job was to come home from work and take care of them. And I realized that wasn't going to be conducive to a good family life. I did not want to leave the police department. So I went all over the department looking for a different job. And finally, I got interviewed in a planning unit, crime analysis unit setting. And the lieutenant who interviewed me eventually, in about 2-3 weeks, announced that I had gotten the job. So I called him to tell him, he wouldn't regret it. And I'm glad he chose me over the others. And he said, well, stop. Before you go any further, let me tell you that there were 6 of you that applied. 4 people walked out of the interview. 1 turned the job down, and you were left. So that's how I got started in crime analysis. Basically, last person standing. Nobody wanted it. And the reason they didn't want it is because mainly the job was to present to the command staff and to go to public safety meetings with the city council and use computer software, which very few people knew much about in 1988. So I was willing to learn, and it didn't bother me to talk to people. So at any rate, that's how I got started.
So you eventually go on to write publications in the 90s about the legitimacy of crime analysis and the struggle in the 90s. Can you talk a little bit about that, what the struggle was and how it eventually got resolved?
So many times you would use limited computer skills and limited computer power to make some kind of recommendation from people. And a lot of times people didn't even realize that was possible. They were really only interested in reports. But what I was picking up from other analysts around the country was that no one would listen to them and that they basically only wanted them to do reports. So basically we would tell people to seek out someone who was interested in, their position. In other words, they trusted that they had good information, feed them the information, and they'll let those people actually be successful in, preventing crime or catching criminals. And it seemed to start working. I know that in my line of work, we had a series of armed robberies that were happening at grocery stores, and they were at Kroger's grocery stores, and basically they were happening on Sunday morning. And it was pretty simple. We plotted out where the first 4 happened at, and we saw where the next one would probably be based on nothing more than the time of day, day of the week, and the fact that it was in the geographic area which was leading to the next Kroger. So we told the people at our central patrol that this was going to happen on Sunday morning, and this was the one they needed to deploy on. They begrudgingly did it. They showed up there, and sure enough, the same people that had robbed the other 4 stores showed up almost exactly at the same time that we told them it would, and they were able to catch them. And they looked at us and said, "How could you make such a call? How would you possibly know that this was happening?" And really, if you just look at it, it was pretty obvious where the next crime was going to occur because of the direction the guy was going in. Or I shouldn't say guy, there was more than one, but the direction they were going in and the fact that they were very systematic about what they were doing. So that was how I got legitimacy to start with. And then the second thing is when people out in other cities, especially with the ones that were not police officers, but, we started transitioning to non-sworn in the 90s, and many of the non-sworn were women that took over this position. They were very good at doing analytical work and figuring out who it was that was going to commit a crime, but they couldn't get people to listen to them. So finally, like I said, they picked out people they thought were important that would actually do the job based on what they were telling them and take a chance. And it worked. Many times they found that these people who were very interested in their work, and they did get successful arrests. So I think that was the key, was finding people that would trust your analytical work and help you to show that it's possible to predict what crime was going to occur.
So when you first started with your unit, was it all sworn? Then did it switch over to be predominantly civilian?
Yes, it was all sworn, and basically we had one at every one of the 6 stations, and then 4 or 5 of us at the main headquarters. And like I said, everyone was an officer or detective, and basically they were learning how to use computer skills, and they were learning about crime analysis. And what they didn't have was good current information that they could pull on other than mainframe reports. So that's where I got very fortunate. I found some money that had been set aside from a grant from 5 years earlier that was like $90,000, and I was able to use that money to go out and find a contractor who could write a program that would bring things from the mainframe to the PC and integrate it with things like MapInfo and if whatever computer software you wanted it to work with, and Excel and things like that, which had just gotten started. We had just gotten the ability to use that. I think Lotus was the big thing at that time. That was the big software that eventually Microsoft overtook with Microsoft Excel. But this was just the beginning time when all the software started showing up. So I guess I could tell you the story about we taught them how to use the Excel program, and we taught them how to do something called subtotals, where they were looking for common denominators on each type of crime. And one particular crime they were looking at were cars that were broken into. And so there were lots and lots of records. And so I had 3 or 4 of them working on it, and they were doing these subtotals with like 30, 40,000 records, because I was trying to find common denominator over the course of a whole year. And each one of them was given the same task, just to see if they came up with the same response. It was kind of a learning process. And the boss, she sort of the non-sworn executive assistant chief came in, and she saw, and she says, "Well, what are they doing? They're just sitting there." And I explained to her, I said that, 3 of them have 4 megabytes of memory on the computer, and it takes about 20 minutes to run this query. And then that other person that's sitting at the back has 8 megabytes of memory on their computer, and they're able to get it done in 20 seconds. And so she says to me, "You're telling me that the efficiency rate is that much better with 4 additional megabytes of memory?" And I said, "Yes, that's pretty phenomenal." And she says, "And how much will that cost?" And I said, "About $400 per computer to upgrade them all." So she didn't say anything else. She left, and that was on a Monday. On a Wednesday, somebody shows up. He says, "Ask for me," and he's got 3 brand new 8 megabyte memory computers that she had rented for me. So it does work to show somebody how efficiency can really help in getting things done. So I actually got 3 new computers in 2 days. And you try doing that in the city anywhere, it's impossible.
So you're talking about teaching folks the computers back in the 90s. Did you see a difference? Was it easier to teach civilians versus sworn?
Well, most of the civilians that later on that I was involved with that we hired all already knew how to use the software. Okay. So that was kind of one of the things we were looking for. But, we basically started out with 1 Macintosh computer, which was quite expensive at the time, but it would help us to do charting. We could actually create charts. And one of the things that caught the attention of the command staff was we were able to show how crime had physically gone down over the last 4 or 5 years. And they could see it in a bar chart, and they were really impressed with that. So we were able to start, we had to literally type in DOS prompt how to get to, these software programs. And so it was completely different than the first Windows 95 program that came out. We literally, we were doing everything to learn ourselves, but once you learn something like how to use a function, you were able to literally, explain that to somebody and show them over and over again, and they got it. And so, but you had 6 remote stations where I had to go and actually bring them together to teach them. And when we finally got that program that integrated the DBase program with the MapInfo program, it was not hard to teach them how to push buttons and automate reports. What was hard is to interpret the data that they actually got. So it was more than just computer software. It was also a little bit about analytics. And believe it or not, it was a challenge to teach them about percent of total and percent change and things like that. I mean, those I consider to be pretty unique, not unique, but very. These are the type of formulas that every analyst should be using every day to figure things out. But a lot of them didn't understand any of that. So that was one of the most important things to teach them, was basic statistics as well as software.
So this is around the time where you're seeing data become important. And the difference between you're producing everything on a computer versus what some officers might say was, I get everything from the street. Like I go out there, I go to the city, I look around the street, and the street tells me what's going on. And now we're moving towards this data telling us what's going on, and the transfer and the balance between, which data you're getting from the computer and data that you're seeing out in the field.
Right. There are some very smart officers that knew exactly what it was that was going on, and they were able to make determinations as to, where to actually post themselves if they wanted to catch criminals, or they actually read all the reports and came up with their own conclusion as to where the next one might come up. But when I left that particular station, I remember on a Friday or Saturday night. We just gotten mobile computers, and so we were able to actually see the calls that came in, and we could understand what was happening there. And we would see somewhere in the neighborhood of about 80 to 90 calls in just our station that we're holding when we began our shift. So people really didn't have any time to do any of the stuff that we're talking about, not on nights and many times not on evenings. Now, in the daytime, they probably might have had a little bit more time. But when you're chasing calls from the time you came to work to the time you went home, there's really very little time to consider catching criminals. But you just got to, you can catch them as you go on the call, but basically you don't have time to sit back and look. Now, maybe on some slow weekdays you could do that. And in fact, at one particular point when I was in patrol, I was asked to get a group of officers together and do nothing more than reduce crime in that particular division, which we did. We were able to go out and work with the deployment people that work days and evenings, and at night go out and catch people that they couldn't catch in the day and evening, as well as to, look for known offenders that might be, have open warrants and things of that nature. But that was really hard back in 86, 87 to get all that information, to do something about it. Because again, the mobile computer, all it really did was tell us how many calls they were waiting and who the contact person was.
Now, you mentioned that you got a grant that got you. Was it just hardware, or was it hardware and software? But you used this grant to pretty much set the unit up for success.
Right. So I had a deputy chief that was so supportive. He said to me, whatever you need as far as travel, as far as training, whatever. He funded a lot of that to start with. And so I started digging into, we had, it's called ARGIS or something like that in Southern California, that had created a program. They were putting together all the different cities in the San Diego area for sharing information. So the city of Dallas had gotten $100,000 grant for that, to model that program in Dallas and the region around Dallas. But as it turned out, they abandoned it. I don't know, probably a year into the program. And I'm not sure why they abandoned it, because it was a great program. Okay, so they let that money sit. And so all it took was writing a letter from the city to the criminal justice department in the state and asking if we can convert that money into a crime analysis system. And that's all we had to say. They didn't even tell us how we could spend it. They were able to spend it on training, on hardware, on software. So we were able to buy all kinds of stuff to get started. And again, key was to take stuff off the mainframe. The only way we could get it off the mainframe was on a tape. Take the tape and then divide it into the different divisions and literally carry it to them on a disc every day. Or you put it in the mail, it wouldn't get there for 8 hours. But basically, we would carry it to them. And because we didn't have the kind of bandwidth that people have today where you could just download it and send it to them. The average person at a station didn't have that bandwidth. Now we had specialized people who could take huge files and move them back and forth, but that was limited to one group. And so not my group. So, but again, that was the start of being able, and one of the things that I think is important is that the person that I hired was a police officer from Washington, D.C., who was in his heyday. He was, getting ready to retire. He was learning, he had learned how to use his D-Base program. And he was able to create a program that automated a lot of functions that I thought we needed. And I had met him by going to a conference where the government had paid for our tuition to go there. And we went there and listened to him, and he told me about the program, showed me all the neat stuff, said he could convert it into, our data could be converted into that program. And I told the city, what I needed. And I wrote a contract, because you got to do your own contracts back then. So I wrote the contract for that one. And he told me that he could automate it so that it would go in geocode and go directly into this map info program. That was the only one that he was working with at the time. And so I basically got all that approved. And as I was going through the approval process, you had to go through an attorney, a city attorney. And the city attorney says to me, now I've heard from some people here at the city in the information division that you're bid splitting. And if you're not familiar with that, that's a crime. Means you take two things, split them apart when they're really one. And she was told that this programmer and the Map Info Corporation were the same, but they weren't. And then, soon as she figured out that she had been lied to, well, she couldn't do anything more than help me. I mean, she was so, once you get the city attorney that does all the contracts on your side, it's not hard from there to get anything, get anything accomplished at that point. So I was very fortunate. I lined up some really good allies and, it worked well. And this John Simmons, that was my programmer, came to Dallas and showed my command staff where the arrests were being made for drugs and where the murders were occurring, and they were right on top of each other. And so, although we all knew that, it was really impressive to see it visually. And so, I'll never forget, that meeting was over. They said, well, we were going to completely civilianize, but we want you to lead the hiring of them, and we want to leave you in place, because if it hadn't been for you two police officers, the one from D.C. and me, we would have never seen this, and we would have never known. So it was really very fortunate for me to have met these people and get started that way. And so from there, we civilianized and found some very talented people who weren't police officers that could do this job very well.
And what was the name of the software that John developed?
Well, the first one was called PCAP, Tactical Crime Analysis Program. And I know there was another TCAP program out there that was not related to this. It was another crime prevention type of software. But people didn't do a very good job of covering the names. They just had multiple names for the same program out there. But that's what this was called, Tactical Crime Analysis Program. And he had it in a number of different cities. And so he was able to bring us together with other users, and it was really helpful. And then in 2000, of course, he upgraded it from the regular DOS-based system to a Windows-based system and prepared us for the change in 2000. So that was, of course, about 9 years later.
And just to give some perspective to this, in the 90s, what was the murder rate like in Dallas?
So the worst year was in 1991, and it was 501 official murders. And today, one's too many, but there's 130, 140 on an average year in the last 4 or 5 years in Dallas. So a huge, huge difference in the number of murders, and the population was much less. Of course, the ambulance people are a lot better, and there's a lot of other factors that go into this, but still, it was huge problem that was going on in our city because of the crack epidemic. And I remember the chief going out and talking to a neighborhood where 32 people in a 2-block area had been killed that year. And that's a lot of people in the 2-block area. And it was all drug dealers shooting each other. And so, we were doing everything we could do to deploy down there and to stop that. But, eventually it did. We were able to clean that up. But what a horrible, horrible thing to have happen in a neighborhood.
Hey, you had mentioned moving on from the 90s into the 2000s, and talk a little bit about how 9/11 impacted crime analysis from your perspective.
Well, I know that, one of the first things that the city of Dallas sort of came over to the police department and said is we need someone to work on looking at our infrastructure to make sure that we're protecting it and that we understand where our threats are. So they gave me 2 additional folks. These were actually sworn officers that knew how to use mapping software. And by now, we had transitioned to ESRI or ArcView, and they were able to go out to the 2 airports that we had, 2 major airports that we had, and they were also able to go to probably 4 or 5 major hospitals and a number of huge buildings, and they were able to map each and every floor by using what they call DXF files. So people would give us the actual structural, the actual things that the architect drew up. And we were able to create these programs, convert them over to PDF, and then turn them back into programs that the security people could actually look at. But it was amazing what they uncovered in some of these things. And in fact, one of the things we saw that was very interesting was that inside the basement, the 2nd floor sub-basement of the City Hall, and City Hall was built in 78, 79. So we had fertilizer stacked from floor to ceiling above the sprinkler heads for about, probably in the neighborhood of about 5,000 bags. And it was right next to a 50-gallon not propane, but diesel I guess, storage tank.
Yeah.
And so, you're looking at this and you're saying, well, this goes far and above terrorism. This is just stupid. I mean, who would do something like this? So it turns out the park department decided to save some money, and they stored it in the basement of City Hall. That's all it was just somebody making that kind of decision. And, I reminded them that that's what happened in Oklahoma City, that's what actually took down the building. And they said, it was a big fight. It turns out that they ended up moving it. Of course, they were quite upset at the police department for making a big deal about this because they had to now pay to store it somewhere else. I'm just saying that some of the things you find are ridiculous.
So did your unit change much with the focus being more on terrorism for a lot of police departments after 9/11?
Well, we did have intelligence division that worked with the FBI. They were assigned there, and they worked on terroristic type of issues. That was done mostly outside of our office, mostly sworn officers that were doing that work. And they were assigned at ATF, they were assigned at the FBI, DEA, everywhere that the federal task force was developed, they were sent there. Now, we were able to give them information when they asked for it, but most of what they were looking for was one-on-one potential terrorists, which, if you follow the news, they found several potential terrorists that were going to do terrible damage to buildings in downtown Dallas. At least I can think of two where they were going to blow them up. And these particular task force were able to uncover them, make arrests. And of course, like I said, the FBI has a lot of resources, and they were able to get them both prosecuted.
Very good. I want to switch over. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut you off?
No, I'm just saying. So most of what we did was concentrate on violent crime. We worked with the FBI with violent crime, and our folks that were assigned there, the gang unit. We have a lot of integrated resources in the region. So it's not just Dallas Police Department. It's sort of regionally done. There was majority of our gang unit was assigned to the FBI and funded by them, and they would work in the general region to try to solve problems rather than just in our jurisdiction alone. So again, our job was to feed them information when they needed it.
Well, I want to move on and talk a little bit about the development and creation of the IACA, because you are one of the founding members of IACA. And I'm just going to go over quickly. Initially, the first secretary was Donna Ames, and the first treasurer was Dave Rogers. You were the first vice president of membership. Greg Jackson was vice president of administration. And Stephen Rothstein was the first president, but then quickly Dale Harris took over for him shortly after that to be president. For those that don't know, just talk a little bit about how IACA came to be from your vantage point.
Okay, so like I said, my deputy chief was really interested in knowing what other people were doing. And he was very progressive. He said, you can go wherever you need to go in order to figure this out. And so I did. I went to a lot of, like I said, conferences, and I got to meet a number of different people. And these vendors were very helpful in telling you who was at the forefront of doing crime analysis in their cities. So with that information, we sort of blasted out a few emails to folks, and we all agreed that we could get together to discuss what we could do to keep from reinventing the wheel and maybe to teach each other and basically to become better at this job. So we all met in Kansas City, Missouri, and we were able to, it was only like 8 or 9 of us that met. There was the officers and a few other people, who eventually, I think most of them became officers later on down the road. But what we were doing was using Robert's rules to actually create an organization, the International Association of Crime Analysts, and that's what we did. And from there, again, you didn't have listservs, and you didn't have, ways of sending out like even newsletters in a bulk sense because computer systems wouldn't allow it. So everything was done by getting information out by typing it out. and then printing it, making copies, and then mailing it. And the city of Dallas was great. They let me spend hundreds of dollars mailing stuff out to people so we could keep the idea of the IACA going. And so, like I said, Stephen Roskine had actually got reassigned, and so we couldn't find him. So Dale Harris, who was the next president, he took over, and he's from Colorado. And three of the people that met up there in Kansas City were from Colorado, and so they agreed to join forces with the Colorado Crime Analysis Association to have the very first conference. And it was I don't remember if it was actually in Denver proper, but it was in the Denver area. And we went out there, and it was a great conference. We had like 60 or 70 people for the very first one. And that was followed by one in Tempe, Arizona, and then one in Dallas. And, I think they have the list on the IACA webpage. But yeah, we started that process of getting the ball rolling, and lots of people joined in to help out in any way they could. And that's what really made the organization grow, was all the people volunteering and helping. But we were still small. We were like about 150 to 200 people at the time. We weren't very big. But,
just to put that in perspective, now I think they shoot for about 400 people coming to the conferences, and I think there's about 5,000 members worldwide.
Yes, it's much bigger. And, internet is a wonderful thing. You're able to share a lot of information on that, which when I was, one day I was sitting in the office talking to someone about, this organization, and he says, well, do you have a web page? And I said, not yet. And he said, well, would you like me to make the web page? And I said, sure. And he asked me, what do you want for this and that? And so anyway, he developed our web page, and he said, now, before I can publish it, we have to have a name. So we have to register a name. So we literally walked down the street to one of our internet providers and asked them how we could get a register name. And they said, what do you want to call it? And I said, IACA dot, anything, org, com, whatever I can get. And they said, well, the only one that's available was net. So IACA.net became the only one available with using those four letters in front. So that was a pretty big accomplishment, because had I not done that in 93 or 94, it would have probably never, we wouldn't have been able to get the IACA as a name. We would have had to extend it out. So, but then again, that was the starting point for shooting out information to people. If we could get them to log in and find the web page, because it was a pretty obscure web page at the time.
I love the fact that you had to literally go down to a brick and mortar building to find out what domain names were available. I love that. Seems so bizarre to me now that you had to go travel to an office to figure out what domains were available.
That might have been because I didn't know any better also. Yeah. But the guy who helped us, he ran actual internet service in the city of Dallas, and he knew exactly what to do. And since it was only a few blocks away from the office, it was easier to walk over and ask him. And it was great that he gave us the ability to walk in and talk to him. To me, sometimes face-to-face gets a lot accomplished. And so that's what we did. And we were off and running that same day.
Well, you said 93, 94. Just to put that into perspective, I'm pretty sure the ESPN, their website launched in 94. So you were on par with them developing a website for IACA.
So, and I knew nothing about making a web page, but this other fellow that worked with me, he knew everything about it at the time. He was really good, and he did a great job of setting it up and getting it started. And then from there, we had other experts like Jim Mallard who came along and really transitioned and made that website phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we still have. I'm not familiar with who the current expert is, but I'm sure they have lots and lots of good, talented people that will continue to expand the use of that web page.
Were you president when the Listserv came to be?
So, no, I was vice president of membership from 91 to 94. And then at the conference in 94, I transitioned over to president. Mm-hmm. And I stayed president until 2000. And then from 2000 to 2006, I was past president, because that was an office we continued on with. So for 2 terms, I think for 2 3-year terms afterwards, I was the past president. So I stayed involved in that from 90, as an officer from 91 until 2006. That was a long time. So,
when did the Listserv come to be?
oh boy, I don't remember. It's probably in early 2000s.
Oh, okay.
Or right around that time. That's when it really took off, and somebody else developed that. That was a great, fantastic addition to time analysis, because you could ask questions and you could share stuff immediately with people.
What were kind of some of the lessons learned? I'm just thinking back to developing this organization and being one of the first vice presidents and presidents. I mean, is there anything that, you either regret or wish you would have done better, or, as I mentioned, is there any lessons learned?
Well, first off, we were only able to get speakers to come through personal contact, and I think I was very fortunate. I met people because I'd go to the NIJ and do reviews, and I'd take all their names and I'd write down and tell them I was going to call them later for possibly doing presentations, and I'd meet people at conferences. And I mean, I met some really smart folks, and so we were able to bring those folks in for as little as possible pay-wise, because we really didn't have a whole lot of money until we collected tuition from people. And which brings me to the hotels, which would always say, well, we'll hold these rooms for you, but you got to put them on a credit card, which typically was my credit card. And that was kind of a, risky business when you're putting $4,000 or $5,000 on a credit card, hoping that enough people show up in order to cover the cost. And I was very fortunate. They always did.
It sounds like you had support from a boss and support from home with that, putting that on the credit card.
Yeah, that was a tough one. So yes, I was very fortunate that my wife was kind enough to accept that as a way of growing this nonprofit. And she knew that it was important to me. So yeah, we took a chance. So I told her I'd work a lot of extra jobs if it didn't work out, and I still worked a lot of extra jobs. So anyway, that was one thing I could always do, work extra. So said it all worked out. Didn't cost me anything. All the speakers came. They were all reasonable. A lot of them did it for free, and that was great.
Anyway, what do you think is your greatest accomplishment for the IACA?
I think one of the most important things that we were able to do was to share information with other folks and get that web page up and running, because without that, we really didn't have a focal point where the IACA existed. Otherwise it was just word of mouth and emails to and from people, back and forth. But, we had a lot of, you mentioned, what was his name? The vice president of administration. He was from Georgia Power and Light, and he kicked in some money. He helped us out with some things. He was great. He was super nice
Gregory
guy.
Jackson.
Greg Jackson. Gregory Jackson was super helpful. I remember that, because he was the only one that didn't work for a city or a county or a state, and he was all he wanted to do was to help us grow. So I thought he was great, and I think that the biggest thing was to make relationships with other analysts who later on became officers, and who also worked very hard. Expand the concept of crime analysis to all these different places, not only in law enforcement, but in banks and other organizations that, more or less use analysts now.
Very good. Well, I appreciate all the work that you've done for the IACA, because the IACA has been a blessing to me. I have gotten out 3 times as much as I put in with the work that I've done. So, and you and I even had a chance to work together with standards, methods, and technology. It's funny when I think about that. You had mentioned that no one else wanted the job. I always joked around that that's how I got that job, being chair of standards, methods, and technology. That no one really wanted it, and I was the only one dumb enough to say yes.
If we didn't have volunteers, nothing would get done.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Hey, so let's take a break. And when we come back, I want to stay in the 90s a little bit. I want to compare and contrast computer technology from then to now. I also want to get into more of your personal interests. So you're listening to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Tony Berger. I want to encourage each and every one of you to refuse to be offended. We're living in a world right now where everybody's talking and divided on different issues, and we are on social media, and what happens invariably is that somebody says or types something that irks us, makes us mad. And I just want to encourage you to not take offense to what other people say. Sniping back and forth at people serves no purpose.
So this is Sam, and I want to let you know that it's okay to talk to strangers. Obviously not if you are 4 or if you're walking alone at night or in the woods. But in general, if you're just out in your day-to-day life or you're traveling or whatever, talk to somebody, talk to strangers. It makes you a more interesting person because it gives you more perspective on life. Everyone is walking around with an interesting story. So many people will defy your expectations when you see someone and you make certain assumptions about them, whether they're conscious or unconscious. I love the moment when you realize you were wrong. It's a great feeling, and I think it makes your life richer in general. You know, if you're too shy, then maybe just read Humans of New York. That might help you to understand other people's experiences. But I'm just here to say, don't not talk to strangers.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking with Mark Stallo, and he was taking us back to the 90s and talking about software and hardware specs for computers. And I took advantage of this topic and did some research, pulled some specs from a standard desktop computer from 1995. And I want to just to compare it to what you could get today. So you hit the nail on the head in terms of the memory. You had said that it was $400 extra for 4 megabits more of memory. And that's exactly what my research found on the internet. So in 1995, 8 megabits was the memory for an average desktop. And to put that in perspective today, it's 8 gigabytes.
Yep. Huge difference. Huge difference. And the storage devices were small, very small compared to terabytes today. So,
yeah, that's the hard drive. What do you think the megabytes of hard drive was in 1995?
Well, for our server, it was 100. And for the average one, it was 25 to 30. I think they went in 20s. So probably 20 or 40 megabytes for a regular computer.
Oh, man. Oh, hard drive. And then today it's 1 terabyte.
Right. So, big difference. But the programs were small. When you put the programs on, they were very small. Yeah. And so, we had what we had. And, it was very expensive. And people weren't accustomed to it. And I was telling you earlier, in 1995, the first Microsoft Office program began. And from there, I absolutely loved Microsoft Office. I learned a lot from going to classes, and I was able to write my first, it was really a bad book, but I wrote a book and using Microsoft Office. And then Christopher Bruce came along and says, I'd like to write it with you and improve it. And he sure did. And so we wrote 2 versions, one for 2003 and one for 2007. And it was a lot of work. And, it's funny, I can still use that 2007. Just the front part of the program is a little different, but all the guts, all the actual steps are the same. Microsoft never changed any of that. They just changed the front end. So it's been very helpful in teaching people how to use that kind of software. And if they don't like looking at a book, they can always go to YouTube and get a video.
So what was your motivation to writing, the publications on Microsoft Office products in crime analysis?
Well, I had written out a whole bunch of steps for people so that they could do certain things. When we were teaching people how to use Excel, for example, you have to give them step-by-step instructions. So people started saying, that stuff's pretty interesting. Can I have it so I can publish it? And I said, well, I think I'll do that. I think I'll publish it. So that's why I did it. I wanted to protect the work I'd done. And so that's why we went out and self-published. And I self-published because, it was a lot easier to get it done and in 30 days you had a book. And if people didn't like it, they didn't have to buy it. And we made it as cheap as you can make it. $24, I think it was what we were selling it for. And giving many books to the IACA to teach in their classes. And like I said, the idea wasn't to make money. It was to get the concepts out. So, it took a long time. And I remember that generally Chris would work on the Access. I'd work on the Excel. He'd work on Word, and I'd work on PowerPoint. So we sort of flipped them. And so it was half as much work when two people were doing it.
Yeah, and I have to apologize to you because over the years, I have recommended that book, but I always said it was Chris's book. Like I didn't realize it until I would look at it that I was like, oh yeah, that Mark Stallo was the co-author of that. So I apologize to you that I didn't give you full credit with recommending that book.
That's all right. We flipped. I did the 2003 first. I was first name on the 2003 version, and he was first name on the 2007 version. So flip a coin if we ever do another version.
Well, it's interesting because I always think of with Excel, 2003 to 2007 was a big deal, right? Because the number of records, what was it, like 64,000 or 65,000 rows was
something
the
like
limit?
That. Yeah, compared to 1 million something now. So, big difference.
By the time 2007 came around, there was a lot of times where I had to split the data up to fit it in the old format of 2003. Because I had hundreds of thousands of records, and we had to split it up the data because it wouldn't save on one Excel spreadsheet.
Right, and that saved us a lot of problems. You can interchange DBase files with Excel, and back and forth you could go. So, and Access, Access was such a big time saver for people. And just, when you asked, just in general, my job, a lot of it was to go out to the different stations and to talk to people about what they needed. And I was amazed at the number of times I'd show up and I'd see somebody who I hadn't seen in a while, and I asked them what they were doing, and they would tell me, well, I'm creating a report. And I go, what kind of report are you creating? He said, well, it's about deployment. It's about what we did this week. And so I'm looking at this spreadsheet for the type of crime. I'm looking at this spreadsheet for the type of property that was taken. I'm looking at this one for the type of vehicles that were used, and this one for suspect information. And then I'm putting them all together to make a report. And I said, oh, Lord, have you ever heard of Access? And they said, no. So I said, would you object to me taking these sheets and putting them into tables and then linking them together with the service number and maybe generating your report in 5 minutes? And they said, well, I don't know what you're talking about, but it sounds good to me. So basically I showed them all how to do that, and it saved them, oh my God, 4 or 5 hours a week of doing it by hand, because that's what people do when they don't know any better, and no one's ever showed them. I've been teaching classes where I showed them how to do formulas in Excel, and somebody would say, in every class, somebody would say, I always did it with a calculator and typed it in. So, look, you never know how inefficient people can be, and it's not because of anything other than the fact no one ever showed them. So it was a lot of personal gratification. I mean, I really got a lot out of showing people how to save time. I thought that was great, and I enjoyed that immensely. And, usually the response I got was the same as that sergeant. He says to me, don't tell anybody because now I have 3 extra hours to drink coffee. So I thought, yeah, okay. So
I think that's one of the downsides to the CompStat era for analysis is that it created busy work. People had to spend so many hours each week getting the binders together or maps or charts, and based on all the different jurisdictions. And, you're talking about each week producing 50 plus page 3-ring binder report to all command staff. Basically, that's what people's jobs was, is just producing that CompStat report. Just as you mentioned, if they don't know any better, they're going to do what works. It worked last week. I'm going to do it now. And even though it takes me 20 hours a week to produce that.
That's why linking is so important, files, so that you don't have to create things. You could do a whole presentation, change the numbers, and it should update itself. Mm-hmm. You should be able to do all that in a few minutes. And that's what I wanted people to understand. And so I think a lot of what I did in the Dallas Police Department was to basically help automate and help save a lot of time. So people didn't waste it, I think that's important because the more time you have, the more you can accomplish if you really are interested in getting your job done.
Just to finish up on the technology specs, in 1995, you're looking at a 33 megahertz processor. Today, you're looking at minimum 4.2 gigahertz. I looked up a plotter. 36-inch plotter. So this is 1993 Hewlett Packard design jet 650C Model A. The resolution on it, which is, for those that don't know, the printers measure resolution in dots per inch. So the DPI in 1993 was 300 by 300. And just to give you some perspective, today, when comparing the Hewlett Packard design jet T530, again, 36 inches, it is 2400 by 1200. So easily 4 times the resolution. And I thought it was interesting, too. I found out, so it had 4 megabits of RAM back in 1993 compared to 1 gig of RAM today. And interestingly, the website, the information that I found in 1993, they expected about 40 jobs per day for the plotter. And today they're expecting 80 jobs per hour for this. So we've come a long way in terms of the plotters and printing out maps and charts and everything else that's critical for crime analysis units.
Absolutely. So, and hopefully they're putting them display in the stations where the officers can see them. Hopefully. So, yeah. Not the plotted maps. I'm talking about electronic presentations on a regular basis, and tell them what's new and what's happening. So.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good point. You probably don't need a plotter today, right? Everything should be on the web. Everything can probably be posted throughout a department on a flat screen TV. You don't need it to be printed out and hung up on a wall.
No. So. Yeah, and it's much more current, and it doesn't cost near as much money to change it out. So,
so the next section here is a section we call quick queries. And this is rapid fire questions. It's 1-word answers as fast as you can. So I got 20 questions here. And so you don't need to give any explanation. You just give 1-word answers. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yes.
Do you prefer Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Access?
Excel.
Cincinnati chili, yay or nay?
Oh, yay.
Is the ski mask symbol the best map symbol for robberies and burglaries?
Yes.
Do you prefer pecan pie or pecan pralines?
Pie.
Hotspot maps, aka choropleth maps, should always use shades of red. Fact or fiction?
Yes.
Do you like cats or dogs?
Dog.
Should analysts have a remote connection to their department's data?
Yes.
Would you rather work on a map, link chart, or bulletin?
Link chart.
Which are you most looking forward to visiting for the first time? Australia or New Zealand?
New Zealand.
Do you prefer cupcakes or donuts?
Donuts.
Is it better to be too early or just a couple minutes late?
Too early.
Hiking. Do you prefer the mountains or the woods?
Woods.
At the movie, candy or popcorn?
Popcorn.
But do you have a go-to candy?
Dots.
Toilet paper, over or under?
Over.
Who has the better wine, Germany or Argentina?
Argentina.
Beach house or lake house?
Lake house.
Do you prefer teaching college students or sworn officers?
I'll say college students.
When you go to Vegas, would you rather go to the theaters or the casino?
Casino.
And finally, best war movie from 2019, Midway or 1917?
Midway.
All right. Very good. Well, you survived the quick queries, and that leads us to our final section, which is Words to the World. And this is where I give the guest the final say of the program, so you can promote any idea, any topic that you want. This is your time. Mark, what are your words to the world?
Okay, so number one, we don't need to keep reinventing the wheel. If somebody already knows how to do it, learn from them. One of the things I learned from Christopher Bruce was he continually said how important it was to get out and see the jurisdiction that you work in. I already knew that, and I agreed with it, but I can't tell you how important it is to know what is happening in the field. If you don't understand the neighborhood, if you don't understand what it is that's going on in that neighborhood, what kind of people live there, and what kind of problems they're having, you cannot solve them for them. So get out and get to learning what is going on in your jurisdiction.
Well, very good. Well, you have given me just enough to talk bad about you later. I appreciate your time today. Thank you, Mark, and be safe.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to the Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA Podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another expert in this great field.